Endurance Junkie Podcast, episode 112. Hey Junkies, how are you doing? My name is Peter, and thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Endurance Junkie Podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Now, every listen means so much to me, so if you end up liking today's interview and think someone else would too, feel free to share it on your own social media channels. That would be awesome and very much appreciated. And if you have suggestions for possible future guests, just shoot me an email to peter@junkiepodcast.com and I'll try to make it happen. Also, feel free to join me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you want to discuss or leave your comments. My handle is @junkiepodcast on all platforms, so it should be nice and easy for us to connect. Now, Sarah Piampiano competed in her first triathlon in 2009 on a bet from a friend, and she fell in love with the sport. Over the next 2 years, she made the journey from newbie triathlete to amateur champion, finishing as a top American amateur at the 2011 Hawaii Ironman. In 2012, she left her full-time position in finance and began competing as a pro under the guidance of Matt Dixon at Purple Patch Fitness, winning several 70.3 and full-distance Ironman titles since. So hi Sarah, thanks for coming on the show. Now, for those of us who don't know you, can you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and your sporting background and how you got into triathlon?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always fun to do these, and you've got a great podcast, so I'm excited to be on it. But in terms of my background, I mean, I grew up as a really athletic kid. I pretty much played every sport that you could imagine, and from a very early age, I was really quite serious about ski racing and downhill ski racing and running, and when I got to high school, I was sort of forced to make a decision whether or not I wanted to go down the running path or go down the ski racing path. If I was to have kind of greater success at one of them. And I ended up choosing ski racing. I went to a special high school in Vermont that was dedicated just to trying to place athletes on their respective national teams. So I was trying to make the U.S. ski team. And I didn't end up making it. I mean, I competed on a national and international level, but didn't end up getting named to the team. And so when I graduated from high school, I ended up just continuing on and going on to college. And I competed at Division I level and in ski racing there, and also ran cross country. So I kind of came back to running in college. But at that point, I think realizing that I wasn't going to make the U.S. ski team and hadn't put a big focus on running for quite a long while, I just kind of did it for fun and really came back to doing it for the joy of it, and started kind of focusing on what was going to be next in my career, and graduated from university and went off to Wall Street, where I initially worked on the trading floor, and then moved into mergers and acquisitions and investment banking, and was working really long hours, a lot of travel, pretty much working 7 days a week, a bunch of all-nighters in there. I mean, it was a pretty grueling work schedule, and didn't really make a lot of time for myself and my kind of well-being and health. I was smoking at one point kind of up to 2 packs of cigarettes a day, so I was smoking quite a bit. Never worked out. I was always eating out. Like, I don't think I had a single thing in my refrigerator. But just wasn't leading like a super healthy lifestyle. And in 2009, I was out one night at a bar with a friend of mine from college, and he had put on about 50 pounds since we had graduated, and was telling us that he had signed up for this triathlon, an Olympic distance triathlon in New Hampshire, to kind of motivate him to lose weight, and one thing led to another, and we ended up making a bet as to who could beat the other person in the race. And I we went and did the race, and I hadn't trained at all for it. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. I was completely clueless, but showed up and raced. I actually raced under somebody else's name. I hadn't even signed up properly for the race, and just totally fell in love with the sport and fell in love with the experience, and all of the competitive juices that I had from growing up really started flowing, and felt really inspired, and pretty much quit smoking on the spot. I went out the next few days after I got back from the race and bought a bike and kind of started training a little bit, and that's kind of really where it all started. But when I went to my next race, which was I would say 3 or 4 months later, I ended up winning that race, and at that point, that's where I kind of started getting this little voice inside my head thinking about trying to take it a bit more seriously and maybe starting to race pro, because I'd had this dream growing up of being in the Olympics and competing at a very high level in athletics, and I had kind of given that up in this seeing what I kind of had, the improvements I had made over that very short period of time. It got me really motivated that maybe this was something that was my opportunity to go and do that. So that's kind of how it all started. And I just continued to work and train as much as I could and go out and compete and race, and definitely had some success in that first year. I'd say 2010 was really my first year of racing.
Mm. So how did you combine your training then with that very tough job in finance? I mean, if you can do it as a bit of an amateur and doing these races for fun, I mean, I can imagine you can get in 6 or 8 hours of training, but if you want to do it seriously and even race for wins, I mean, you need to take it a bit more serious.
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, and to be honest, like looking back, I totally would have done things differently. I mean, I was training, or my prescribed training was somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 hours a week, but I was working really, really long hours, and there would be times when I would get home at like 1 o'clock in the morning and get on my trainer and do my trainer ride, and then get up the next morning early to go swim so I could fit my swim in before going to work. And I ended up getting injured and also sick quite a bit. And that's why I say if I were to go back and do it again, I would change things, because I just don't think that sleep, knowing now the importance of sleep and how big of a role that plays on recovery and performance and injury prevention and all those things, I think that I probably would have tried to cut my training hours down to under 10 and just really focused on quality over quantity, and then allocate a few more hours to sleep. But it was tough, and I also began to feel a little bit burned out, because like on one hand, triathlon, I felt really passionate about it and I wanted to dedicate all my time to it, but I felt a little overwhelmed with trying to combine the work and the long hours at work with trying to train and even try to fit some social time in with my friends. So I think that's something that a lot of amateur athletes and triathletes probably really struggle with, particularly if you have family, just really finding the time to balance it all out. And so, yeah, it was tough.
I started to see why you're working with Matt Dixon as a coach, but we'll touch on that later. But so you started winning races pretty early on. What made you realize that you could make it to the elite level, and what made you decide to eventually leave that job in finance and go for the pro athlete life? Because I think the paycheck in finance was a bit better than the one as a pro athlete.
It was pretty good. Well, I mean, I just felt like I got very early on. I felt like I maybe had this opportunity to race professionally, and originally my sights were sort of set on the Olympics, but I pretty quickly figured out that I wasn't a strong enough swimmer to be able to really race in that format of triathlon, with the draft legal racing, and that the longer distance stuff was really better suited for me. But then I kind of had my sights on Ironman and competing at this really high level, and I decided, if I'm going to be the best in the world, I have to be coached by one of the best coaches in the world. And so I reached out to I researched who coached all the best athletes, and I reached out to a lot of them. Some of them responded and I had conversations with, and a couple didn't. But I ended up, for all the coaches I spoke with, I said, okay, I've qualified for my pro card. I want to start racing pro. And they all said, okay, great. That sounds good. And Matt Dixon kind of said to me, oh, well, whatever. Like, I don't think that you're ready to go pro, and I don't really have time to coach you anyway. And that was not the answer that I was looking for from Matt. And to be honest, I kind of thrive under adversity a little bit. And so for him to kind of push back on that, like, it definitely made me want to be coached by him more. But I ended up flying out to San Francisco and reaching out to him and saying, hey, I'm in San Francisco. Can you meet? And he said, oh, I have 20 minutes for coffee. And so we sat down, and we ended up sitting down for about an hour. And I very vividly remember him. We were sitting at a picnic table outside a cafe, and he said, well, what do you want? And I looked down and I said, I want to be world champion. And he said, look at me in the face and tell me that. And I said, I looked up and I said, I want to be a world champion. And I was a little embarrassed to tell him that, because here I was, this little amateur athlete without really, that much to go on. And I was sitting here telling this coach of these amazing professional athletes that I wanted to be world champion. And I was a little bit embarrassed about that, but
yeah, it's a pretty bold statement. Yeah,
it is a very bold statement. But he agreed to coach me, and there was just something about Matt's in my meeting and our prior conversation that really struck me. And I grew up in a family where it's a lot of tough love. If you fall down and hurt your knee, nobody's going to be babying you. They just say, get up and keep going. Like, is it broken? No. Okay, fine. Just like keep going. And even if it is broken, then, splint it up and keep going type of thing. Like there's no, and even when you did a good job in my family, it was like, good job, but you did this wrong. And so you got to keep working because you can get to the next level type of thing. And I say that everything was in a very positive sense. Positive encouragement, but there was just a real high bar for performance just generally in life set within my family, and I feel like Matt's approach is very similar. Like, he has very high expectations of us to perform. There's no cutting corners. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of putting your head down. He doesn't really coddle people, and that worked for me. That's my personality. If I do a good job, I like to be told that I did a good job. But if I don't do a good job, I like to be told that sucked too. And so Matt and I just work really, really well from that standpoint. And I think I noticed that, and he noticed that very early on. And I think that's part of the reason why we still work together, to this day, because from a personality standpoint, we just really mesh. We mesh very, very well.
Yeah. And all the training that you did prior to getting that pro card, did you do that all by yourself, or were you using another coach at that time?
Well, no, I didn't have another coach, but Matt, when Matt agreed to work with me, he said, I may or may not let you take your pro card. That's up to me to decide, but I'll let you know when I think you're ready. And so, and one of his requirements was that I had to go out and win every single amateur race that I entered. And so I went out in 2011 and pretty much did that. I think there was 170.3. I got second overall amateur. And then at the Ironman World Championships, I was the top American, but I think I was fourth overall amateur. And, so, I put my head down and wanted to show him that I could do it. And so for 2011, he and I worked together. And at the end of 2011, that's when he said, okay, I think that you're ready to take the step. And for me, I was going all in. I felt like if I was really going to be successful at this, I needed to commit myself 100% to training and racing. And my view was I had been really successful in my professional career thus far. And, if you were to go out and start a business, I thought that, generally I think you can tell within a 2-year period whether or not your business is on a good trajectory or not. And that's how I sort of was viewing my foray into racing triathlon at a professional level. I thought I'll do it for 2 years, and if at the end of 2 years this is just really not going anywhere, then I'll go back to finance and just continue on working in the corporate world. But I'm going to give myself 2 years, and I'd saved some money from working in finance, which was great, and just kind of set about to doing everything that I could do to make myself as successful as possible. And here I am 7 years later.
Yeah, cool stuff. So, did you leave your job in finance at the same time as picking that pro card at the end, or were you racing as an amateur in the beginning as to win those races that that Matt set out for you to race?
So 2011, I raced as an amateur, and then when I decided that I was going to take my pro card, I left my job. I was working at HSBC in New York City, and I put my entire life into storage. I owned an apartment in New York, which I held on to for 1 year and rented out because I just thought that if I decided to come back to New York, then having that apartment would be great. But I ended up selling it. But yeah, and so at the end of 2011, put everything to storage. I had about 3 bags and went out to Los Angeles and started living and training there full time at the start of 2012. I actually arrived in Los Angeles on January 1st, 2012. So,
did you quickly see any improvements in your performance compared, when you were training and working, and then compared to living the life of a real pro athlete and just training?
For sure. I mean, over time, like over the last 7 years, my training load has increased quite a bit. But a lot of that's because I'm a more resilient athlete now, and I have more miles in me and I can handle more. But, in that first year that I was training full time, I definitely was doing more hours than I did when I was working. But I also had so much time to recover. And I saw a huge bump up in my performance over the course of that year. And I actually ended up winning a 70.3 it was my second 70.3 as a pro. New Orleans, I went and won that race. And that was like a real shock to my system. I totally was not expecting that to happen. But for sure, I mean, I think one of the benefits of being a professional athlete that amateur athletes don't have is just the recovery time. We have time for massages. We have time to take naps. We have time to put our feet up after a really hard session versus most amateur athletes. They might go and crank out a really hard session on the treadmill in the morning, and then they're like off to the office where they're sitting at a desk and typing behind a computer all day. Mm-hmm. Versus as a professional, I can crank out a really hard treadmill session and then go home and take a nap or put my feet up, which helps you recover. So for sure, I mean, I saw a big jump that first year.
Yeah. And besides the recovery and the naps, are there other things that you as a pro athlete have the time for to monitor that amateur athletes may not, like stuff like your heart rate variability or specific things with your diet or stuff like that?
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think that's it. Interestingly, like when I first started racing professionally, I felt like I had all this time on my hands. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with myself. But then I think as you kind of grow as a pro, you start to incorporate all these other facets of kind of training and recovery into your life, which do take up actually a lot of time, and it ends up really becoming a full-time job. And so, yeah, I mean, I work very closely with a nutritionist, and that is, it takes up a lot of my day because I'm having to really spend a lot of time with food planning and meal preparation and, thinking about meals around training, and every day is different. It's not the same. It's all very tailored to my specific training schedule and levels of intensity on that day and volume and things like that. And so there's a very pretty scientific and precise approach to my nutrition that I've taken on. I do work with a strength trainer twice a week. I get massage at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times now. I go and sometimes do those float spas, which are the Epsom salt baths. I'll do acupuncture not on a regular basis, but maybe once a month or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's, and in the morning and in the evening, I use this device it's an Ember device made by Circacore, and it monitors things like my resting heart rate and my respiratory rate and my oxygen saturation and my hemoglobin levels and my hydration levels and things like that. So I'm constantly monitoring that. I work with another company called Excella, which does a lot of like gut fitness. And so, like the whole thing with your gut health is very important in terms of like your overall well-being and nutrient absorption and performance and things like that. So there's just a lot that goes into getting that extra 1% or 2% that you don't really get to do when you're racing as an amateur.
When you're tracking that much stuff, does it drive you nuts? Don't you get obsessed by these numbers?
Not really. I mean, I think again that like kind of ties back to why Matt and I work really well together. Like I don't get really emotional about stuff, right? Like I don't know. I have to weigh myself on twice a week, and if my weight goes up by a couple of pounds, I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm inflamed from that really hard session I did, or maybe I don't know, like I don't get too overwhelmed by these things, but I use them more also as really as guidelines for myself, right? So for example, I know that if I do a poor job hydrating, it really has an impact on my training performance the following day. So when I'm monitoring my hydration levels and it says, hey, Sarah, you're not hydrated enough, then I know that I need to put a much bigger emphasis on my hydration, which just in turn helps me perform better and recover better. And same thing, like my resting heart rate, if it's really high one day, like I had an 8.5 hour training day yesterday. And so my heart rate this morning was like 10 beats higher than normal. And I don't stress about it because I had an 8.5 hour training day yesterday. Like, of course my heart rate's going to be higher. I'm tired today. So, I think that you can obsess about the metrics, but if you just really use them as like a guideline and kind of to your benefit and in a lot of ways just to kind of cross-check stuff and with how you're kind of subjectively feeling, then they can be really wonderful tools.
So what tools do you recommend us amateurs that we should use? I mean, we can't do it all, but if you would pick like one or two, what would you recommend?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think incorporating strength training is something that is really, really key. It's been such an important part for me of injury prevention. And there was actually a period of time last year where I kind of tapered down my strength training and I felt like I was toying with injury for quite a while. So I definitely would say incorporating a strength training when you can. And then just in terms of like the gizmos and gadgets, like I said, I've been working with this company, Excella, on the gut health, and it is so fascinating when you read the research about gut health, just whether you're an athlete or you're not an athlete, the impact it has on your overall well-being and disease prevention. And it's crazy fascinating. If you want to take the time to look into it, I would say potentially doing that type of testing and finding out kind of how healthy your gut is really important. It can really help you to make some changes in your diet and in your life generally. And then, this Circacore Ember device has been something that I've really incorporated. I just take it in the morning when I wake up and at night before I go to bed. And it's been a really awesome tool for me, particularly, like I said, on monitoring the hydration, because I think sometimes either we forget to drink or even you think that you have been hydrating a lot, but maybe you've just been hydrating with water and you need more electrolyte. And it's just been a really interesting and useful tool for me.
Cool. I'll put those links up on the show notes page. Definitely useful information there.
Cool.
Yeah, now you recently published your 2018 schedule on your website. And as usual, I think Kona will be the A race for the year.
Yep.
But there's a lot of 70.3 races on there as well. And I also noticed 2 full Ironmans before Kona, where last year you only did 1.
Yep.
Yeah, is there a reason why you're doing it differently this year?
Yeah, Well, for me, doing a championship race every year is quite important. And I just think that that's where typically a very high level of competition comes out. And it's one of the few opportunities outside of Kona that you get to really get a great race like that under your belt. So those are always high priority for me. I didn't really want to travel. I'm actually getting married in August, and I didn't want to do quite as much travel this year, just with kind of that added commitment that I have and the planning around that. So we ended up choosing Ironman Texas, which is at the end of April, which is good because it's early enough in the year where you can recover and still do another Ironman before Kona. Last year I did Cairns, which is at the beginning of June, so it's a full kind of 6 weeks later. And so that was kind of one reason, is just having the championship race in. And then I wanted to add in a second Ironman, partially because I really love Lake Placid, and I think that it's a great course for me. It's hilly and really challenging, but also there's a few things that were changing to my pre-race prep, and I really want to be able to test those things out and making a few changes to some of the things that I'm doing in races. And I just view them as really good opportunities to do that before Kona, which is just such an important race for me. So
is that sort of like what happened after you in Kona last year, the cramping issue and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we know what that was. I mean, I had over consumed sodium before the race and really thrown my electrolyte levels way off. But that whole thing that took place with me over consuming the salt just actually ended up kind of being the driver for me working with this new nutritionist and starting to work with Excella and trying some new things with nutritionally and around key sessions and things like that. And and also with kind of even my fueling during, while I'm in training and racing and that sort of thing. And so, you have to be able to test that stuff out. I don't want to wait till Kona to really to do that. So, yeah. And, I say, like, I'm very objective about things, and I am, and I usually with races, the highs and lows of races, I just can kind of deal with that pretty well. But the last year's DNF in Kona really hit me pretty hard, and I want to, I really want to make sure that I do it right this year. And we all want to go into Kona doing it right, but I've got kind of an extra motivation.
Yeah. Was that DNF in Kona, was that the biggest disappointment of your career so far?
It was the biggest disappointment of my career, for sure. I mean, there have been races that I have been disappointed by, but I just genuinely don't believe in DNFing. Like, I believe as long as you can physically finish, you always should. And it's the second race that I've not finished, and that's a very hard thing for me to swallow. And I physically could not finish the race, so it is what it is. But it's hard to do that on such a big stage, and I've got I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself this year, but I'm very motivated to go back and have a really good year this year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we talked about the biggest disappointment, so let's talk about the other one. What's your biggest achievement?
That's a good question. I would say probably there's two that I feel, in the world of triathlon, two that I feel really good about. One of them actually was winning Ironman Argentina in December, and it's actually very interesting because I don't think that it was at all my best race, but I came off of the disappointment of Kona, and then I backed that up with a pretty disappointing race at Ironman Arizona. And probably for the first time ever in my career, I was a little shaken in terms of my confidence. And winning Argentina was just, 2 weeks later after Arizona. So that for me was another kind of scary thing to do, race 2 Ironmans back to back. And to walk away with a win was really emotional for me. And I felt really proud that win and that performance, and it was something that I really needed. So that was really meaningful. But I would say the other one was actually Kona in 2017, which again wasn't really that great of a performance. I was actually pretty disappointed overall with how I felt on the day, but I felt
2016, you mean?
From the get-go. What's that? 2016,
you mean?
2016, sorry. Yeah. I felt bad from the get-go, but I just stuck with it and ended up 7th, and I felt just really proud of that performance because I didn't give up. I think that a lot of times in a lot of situations, people feeling similarly to the way that I felt throughout the entire day. Like there was no point in the swim, no point in the bike, and no point in the run when I really felt good. But I just stuck with it, and I really felt proud of myself for that. So those are kind of two races I feel really good about.
Yeah, great answers. And what's the greatest piece of advice that you've ever received in the sport? Probably something coming from Matt.
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing that, and I go back to this sometimes because actually, I don't want to say a lot, but I remind myself of it pretty frequently, is to really love what you do. You have to be passionate about it, and you have to enjoy the journey and enjoy the process. Because if you don't enjoy the journey and you don't enjoy the process, like the outcome, it's kind of irrelevant. And when you do this full time, there's days and sometimes even weeks when the training is not fun, or you lose motivation, or something just totally stinks, and you get injured, and just the recovery process is trying. And you have to just ask yourself, do I love it? Do I generally love it? Is this something that I'm enjoying? And I think it's such an important thing. And I think for amateurs it's relevant because you're choosing to do triathlon over other things you can do in your life, and sometimes it can seem really hard to balance it, but making sure that you really are passionate about the process of what you're doing is important.
Yeah, well, I can imagine it's a lot more fun than riding your bike all day outside in the sunshine, and instead of spending 12 hours a day inside a Wall Street office. That's for sure.
That's true.
All right, well, thanks for your time, Sarah. Wishing you all the best for 2018. We'll definitely look out for your results. How can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, you can go to my website, www.sarahpiampiano.com, and there's a contact me tab, and you can contact me there or reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter.
How important is social media for pro athletes these days? All about building that brand around the athlete.
It's so important. It's I just think that it's a really wonderful opportunity to share a little bit about yourself and who you are with anybody, with the world, and also to be able to share what you're doing for your sponsors and the brands that you work with, which is really cool and really unique because it's a format that didn't really exist that long ago. So it is really important, but I think it's also really important to be very authentic on those social media sites and not be buying followers and things like that.
No. So. But it's again stuff that you have to put some time and effort into.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of time and thought and effort, and I've got a calendar with, trying to do social media planning and things like that because you want to be, you're busy and I'm not in front of a computer all day long. I'm out training, and so sometimes you have to just remember to be really thoughtful about how you're posting and be consistent in terms of what you're doing. So
well, it keeps us motivated, so keep doing it. Feel free to give some love to your sponsors and partners.
Yeah, I've got some pretty amazing sponsors, and some of them I've been with a really long time. Saucony, or Saucony as some people call it, is my shoe and apparel sponsor, and they just make really unbelievable product. I would encourage anybody who's not tried their stuff before, even their apparel is really amazing, to give them a go. Cliff Bar is my nutrition sponsor, and I could not say enough about this brand. I think that, I feel just so lucky to be with them. They really put a huge focus on sustainability and the environment and being organic and not putting too many chemicals or additives in their products. And they're just a really, really good company with really good people who make really high quality, good product. And I'm really, really stoked to be with them. I work with a hydration company called SOS, which makes unbelievable hydration product. I feel I've been using their stuff for a really long time, and I'm really excited to be able to work with them. Shimano is my component sponsor, and they make all the Dura stuff, which is really unbelievable. Their new group sets are pretty sweet, and they also make some pretty amazing shoes. I work with a company called Bear Mattress, which is the mattress I sleep on. If anybody wants to get a new mattress, you should DM me, and I can send you a discount code for it. Their mattresses are really just unbelievable. And like I said, I work with Circuit Core and Excella, which are fairly new partnerships for me. And also Halo Neuroscience, which they do neural priming. Velofix, which is a new company I started working with at the end of 2017. And they are a mobile bike shop, which is just super awesome and really convenient because they come to you and do all the, all of your bike maintenance, which is really amazing. Polar, I've been working with for quite a few years and have just loved their watches and the product that they put out. And then started working with Zone 3 in 2017 and have just honestly been so impressed with their wetsuits and the accessories, their swimsuits, and the product they've put out too. So I feel really fortunate to be working with them and be an ambassador of theirs.
All right, that's a nice list, and I'll put all those links up on the show notes page as well.
I need to also mention Rudy Project, which is another one of my sponsors, which is the helmet and sunglasses.
Make sure you don't forget anyone.
I know.
Last one to finish this off. If you could sit on a bench and chat for an hour with anyone from the past or the present, who would it be and why?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, for me, sports has always just been such a big influence in my life. And there are so many sports figures that I really admire and have looked up to. I mean, my whole life, I've just completely idolized Joan Benoit-Samuelson, who was the first female to win an Olympic gold medal in the marathon. So I've always just been a huge fan of hers. But I don't know, there's so many amazing, fascinating people that I would love to chat with. In ski racing, there was Herman Meyer, who was just, everybody called him the Herminator, he was incredible to watch. And I don't know, I think I'd have to have like a panel of sports figures for sure.
Okay, that also works.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for your time, Sarah. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
All right, Junkies, you've reached the end of yet another episode of the Endurance Junkie podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Sarah Piampiano for coming on. Now, if you like these little interviews and don't want to miss any future episodes, just head over to iTunes or Stitcher and simply subscribe to the show. The show is also available on Spotify, so if that's your preferred medium, just search for Endurance Junkie podcast in the search bar, and you'll find me there, no problem. All right, thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time. Cheers.